Welcome to Dark Knight Films Reviews and another Versus Night. Tonight I will be comparing Dan Curtis's Dracula from 1974 versus Count Dracula from 1977. So, let's get started with this with the leads. Dan Curtis's Dracula stars Jack Palance and Nigel Davenport. Count Dracula stars Louis Jourdain and Frank Finlay. Now, this is a tough one because Jack Palance plays an excellent Dracula in Dan Curtis's Dracula. But at the same time, Louis Jourdain does do a great job. Different, totally different than what Jack Palance does. But he is much more kindly and so it makes him feel more manipulative to where he just feels like this charismatic even when he's holding Jonathan Harker hostage, basically, and forcing him to write letters, he is kind and acting all gentlemanly. Never once losing his temper or getting upset or anything. Whereas Jack Palance, yes, he does play him pretty calm throughout the movie. And he has similar moments with Jonathan Harker where he makes him do, write letters and everything to home to let them know that he's staying there for a while longer and stuff and all this. But he does it a little bit more sinisterly because that's Jack Palance. And then you have Nigel Davenport as Van Helsing. And his Van Helsing is pretty damn good. But at the same time, Count Dracula's got Frank Finlay. And at first, when he first makes his appearance as Van Helsing in Count Dracula, I didn't know if I was going to like his performance. But as it goes along, he just gives a very, very good performance as Van Helsing in here. So this one, I'm going to have to go with a tie. I can't give one a clear-cut victory on this one because this is just too damn close. So let's move on to supporting and see if we can get a clear-cut winner on that. The supporting cast in Dan Curtis's Dracula consists of Simon Ward, Fiona Lewis, Murray Brown, Penelope Horner, Pamela Brown, Sarah Douglas, Virginia Weatherall, and Barbara Lindley. The supporting cast for Count Dracula consists of Susan Penhaligon, Judy Bowker, Jack Shepard, Mark Burns, Bosco Hogan, Richard Barnes, Sue Vanner, Susie Hickford, and Melinda Mujic. Now, both of these have pretty good supporting casts. I think I'm going to get to some plot points in story, so I'm not going to mention them here. I'm just going to go with the performances, okay? So, Simon Ward as Arthur Holmwood is very good. Gives a really great performance in here. Fiona Lewis as Lucy is very sexy. She really brings a lot to the character in there. Murray Brown, I wasn't a big fan of him as Jonathan Harker. And Penelope Horner as Mina, she was pretty much a pretty good standout in Dan Curtis's Dracula. She was really good. And then we have our brides, Sarah Douglas, Virginia Werthal, and Barbara Lindley. And they are all very attractive women. And, if you're going to have Dracula's brides in there, you gotta have some really attractive women playing them. And these three do a pretty good job in this one. But you have the same thing on Count Dracula on theirs. They have some pretty attractive girls playing Dracula's brides there as well, with Sue Vanner, Susie Hickford, and Belinda Minujic. But the standout in Count Dracula's supporting is Susan Pengelon as Lucy. And you wouldn't expect that because you would think that Judy Bowker's Mina would be the standout. And she is good in the film. But the fact that Lucy basically gets more screen time than Mina, in a way, it's quite different. Now, Lucy does get a lot of screen time in Dan Curtis's Dracula too, and they have a plot point that I'm going to get to on the story and concerning her. But yeah, very good performances on them. Jack Shepherd is incredible as Renfield. He does a great job. I wasn't sure if I was going to enjoy his performance when he first started, but he was damn good. Mark Burns, Bosco Hogan, and Richard Barnes as Dr. Seward, Jonathan Harker, and Quincy are pretty good in their roles. I wouldn't say they're the major standouts. And Bosco Hogan, I kept being reminded of James Keach for some reason. I kept thinking that that was who that was until I saw the credits and saw his name, because he does resemble him a lot, especially whenever he grows the facial hair. He really looks a lot like James Keach. But overall, this one's a tough one too, but I'm going to give a little bit of the edge to Dan Curtis's Dracula on this one. Now let's move on to story. Now, the story for both of these films is very much similar in a lot of respects. They both open with Jonathan Harker going to Castle Dracula and then befalling him to where he is forcing him to stay there. And both of them cover this element of the story. They don't differentiate much when you get to London, when Dracula arrives, or anything much. But the problems with the story when you're comparing them is that Dan Curtis's Dracula does not have Quincy or Dr. Seward or Renfield in it. And for whatever reason, they decided to kill Jonathan Harker in the beginning scene instead of him escaping and making it back to London to help Von Helsing and the rest. He is basically killed by the brides and later on turns up as a vampire, and they have to kill him. And it's like, this is Jonathan Harker. Don't do that to the character. There, like I said, there is no Quincy. There is no. They have Arthur Holmwood is the only character assisting Van Helsing in this, and I don't know if I like that decision to do that. Whereas Count Dracula, it is closer to the actual Bram Stoker's novel because it actually has all of the characters except for, ironically, Arthur Holmwood. Arthur Holmwood and Quincy are kind of merged into one character in here. In fact, his name is Quincy Holmwood. So that was a little bit of a weird decision, but it wasn't quite as bad as what Dan Curtis's Dracula did to Jonathan Harker. Now, one thing I did like about Dan Curtis's Dracula that most people probably wouldn't like is, and they twisted it too, he sees Lucy as a reincarnation of his wife back when he was Vlad the Impaler. So yes, before Bram Stoker's Dracula put the Vlad the Impaler story to Dracula, Dan Curtis's Dracula did it first. And the way that Jack Palance does those moments where he's talking about being Vlad the Impaler are pretty impressive.
Ivar the Lombard, the Turk, poured his thousands across our frontier. We always drove them back.
So, for story, I think I'm going to give the edge on this one to Count Dracula. Even though I do like those Vlad the Impaler elements, and that they switched Mina with Lucy on there as the actual one that Dracula is really targeting. Mina is just an afterthought. Yeah, I'm going to go with Count Dracula on this one because it is closer to the novel, and it gets most of all the characters in there, with the exception of Arthur. So, let's move on to direction. Dan Curtis's Dracula is directed, of course, by Dan Curtis. Count Dracula is directed by Philip Saville. Now, Dan Curtis's Dracula is directed very much the way that Dan Curtis directed his Dark Shadows television series. And I kind of like that because I really like Dark Shadows. But at the same time, it has a very TV feel to it. Count Dracula by Philip Saville it's got the same thing. It's got that television feel to it because it was a BBC film and everything. But I think the problem with Philip Saville's direction is not how he directs it. I mean, some of the scenes are really great in here, but it is these weird filters and effects that he puts throughout the film that, instead of helping and accentuating it like I think he was planning on doing, it distracts from the actual story. So I'm going to give the edge on this one to Dan Curtis for Dan Curtis's Dracula. So that gives the win to Dan Curtis's Dracula by 3-2. So pretty close here. So what did you guys think of these two Dracula movies? Have you seen them? Has my comparison made you want to see them? Let me know in those comments down below. And as usual, if you enjoyed this video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to click that bell icon so you can be notified about future videos just like this one. And while you're by the subscribe button, click that join button and become a Dark Knight fan. Well, that's the end of another Versus Night. If you missed last week's Versus Night, check out the link up in here. Or if you've missed any of the other Versus Nights, check out our playlist and see anything that you have missed.